So talk to me about structured timber. Why is it there is such a focus, or you believe that there should be a focus on timber? You've mentioned about CO2 emissions and getting to net zero, but why timber? Why is timber such an important element of hitting that target?
Timber's a natural product. If we were to build using natural products, a lot of the carbon that is created through manufacture of concrete and steel and so on would disappear. In fact, it sequestrates carbon. I've got a figure here written down in front of me. If the 300,000 homes per year that the government want to build was in timber frame, we would save, or we would store rather, about 6 million tonnes of carbon. So that's the sort of figure that we're talking about. As I mentioned earlier, depending on who you ask, the amount of carbon that is in the ether, anywhere between 25 and 40% is the responsibility of the construction industry. We have a responsibility to look at what we do, and certain clients now are making requests of their supply chain to look at timber as an alternative. Let me give you a good example. The major house builders. So Barratt's, Taylor Wimpey, Persimmon, Bellway, Vistry, I could go on. They're now either buying up timber frame factories or they're building their own, so that they've all got timber frame facilities within their supply chain. About 50% of all the homes that are built in the UK now are built by people who've got a timber frame facility within their supply chain. Now, I'm not saying 50% are timber frame, they're not, but 50% of all the homes that are built by companies that have got that facility in their supply chain. And they're all moving in that direction. And one of the reasons they're doing it is what you mentioned earlier about skills shortages. Because if you can move it into the factory, if you can do more in the factory, you need less people on site. It's cleaner, it's safer, it's more sustainable. Young people probably don't want to be working on wet and windy building sites anymore, So there's a direction of travel. And the other thing is purpose, which I mentioned. I think people nowadays are looking for purpose. And if you know you're going into a career that is going to help the planet as well as pay your mortgage, I think that gives a young person that purpose that they're looking for, that perhaps when I was entering the industry I didn't even know existed, if the truth be known.
I'm interested to get your thoughts, though, on the end of life, though, when it comes to a property that has been built in timber. So if you look at steel as an example, you can easily use steel for 100 plus years after it was first manufactured. Is that the same with modern timber and the way that we treat and manage? I know that it was back in Victorian and medieval times, clearly, because you still have those buildings that are built with the original timbers. But I'm wondering, under the modern ways that we manufacture properties, is that going to be possible for that element or that material to be used in 100 plus years' time?
Okay, it's a good question. And certainly circularity is a big question that everyone's asking at the moment. And I would suggest that, like, from here on, that circularity question is being acknowledged and designed in to anything that's happening now. So what we're looking at, really, I think, understanding your question, is not the distant past, but it's the last, 60 years or something like that is probably what you're talking about. So the reuse of all materials, not just timber, is something that's uppermost in people's minds at the moment. It's a myth to think that most timber goes to landfill. It doesn't. So the way timber is reused can be reused, like you've suggested, can be done with steel. A lot of it goes to biomass. To be honest, which is not the best use, but that's quite a big proportion at the moment. So what I would say to you is that it's very much a huge agenda item at the moment, and it is now being built into the design of new buildings going forward. And it's a consideration for what's happened in the last, 50, 60 years. I mean, your point about steel, again, is theoretically it can be used, but actually when you see what comes off a site, it may not be as easy as that. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves, because this circularity question has only really been in the vocabulary for the last, decade maybe?
If that.
Yeah. So.
I mean, serious consideration, circularity has really been only spoken about.
So if I'm honest with you, I think we're all coming to terms with it. Certainly within the government roadmap that I talked to you about earlier, we've got 7 working groups. One is around carbon, and certainly that circularity topic is front and centre of what we're doing, and we're looking to come through with evidence and recommendations and so on. Because the idea of the roadmap is to look at the barriers, and that's one of them, and to come up with solutions of how we overcome them.
Another thing that I've heard over the years, it's been an objection to using timber, has been the concern about fire.
Yep.
Especially when you start to go more than 2 floors and you start to get into mid-rise. And what would you say to that? Where is the risk? Is there a risk? How do you answer that question?
I can say several. When I came into this role 14 years ago, certainly the fire agenda was front and centre, and it's something that I had to, if you like, hit head on with my priorities. In those days, anyone that wanted to talk about fire was seen as the enemy, and I changed that pretty quickly. And I said, no, we have to approach these people, understand what their issues are, and turn from being the problem into the solution. And in fact, that's where we are now. I'm not suggesting it's me, by the way, but that was the change of approach. So we've now got a set of fire guidance that we can offer. And as long as projects are properly designed and properly constructed, then timber frame is no more dangerous than any other material. You know, fires happen in all sorts of buildings. Grenfell, for example, wasn't a timber frame building. In fact, I understand that the only thing that performed well was the fire doors, which are timber. So, you know, I think we need to be careful about fire and timber in the same breath, although I understand that we were all brought up with the story of the 3 little pigs. So I get it, because it's the culture. But as I say, we've got guidance now, which, as long as it's used properly, you can say that it's very safe. In terms of height, I think only 2 stories is not quite right. You can build up to 4 stories, up to 11 metres, and people do without a problem. No problem with insurance, etc., etc. Anything between 11 and 18 metres, then you're probably having to look to get a fire engineer to do a risk assessment and so on. It's above 18 metres where the main issues are at the moment, and that's since Grenfell. It is UK related because in Europe there are CLT buildings going up that are 12, 13 stories. In fact, we've got 10-storey CLT buildings in London, so it has happened historically. But I understand the nervousness. I understand that if you're a client or a housing association, you know, and Grenfell's happened, that you don't want that to happen again. So I get it. But we're working with these people to find, again, solutions so that once again we can get that ability to build 11 to 18 and then 18 and over. But we're very well aware of the perception, I can assure you.
Do you envisage a world where, or a country in the UK where 90+% of the new buildings that are going up are timber structures?
Well, in Scotland, 90% of the homes are built timber frame. So just across the border, it's happening. In England, we're down at about 10, 11, 12%. And that's where we see the biggest growth opportunity is to increase the amount of timber in construction, is the 2 up, 2 down housing that Bellway and Barratt's and Taylor Wimpey produce. And as I say, that's already happening in terms of what we're seeing they're doing as businesses. That's where we see the opportunity is. But yes, there is an opportunity to, you know, really take a good hard look at the way we build upwards in the conurbations and consider what's suitable for mass timber.